Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving deep today into a question that I'm sure everyone has wondered about at some point. Do guys really not get hints when someone has a crush on them? It's like, come on, how can they be that oblivious? We found this awesome Reddit thread from Rask, where this 16-year-old girl is posing this exact question. She says she's been dropping hints for like a whole month now on her 15-year-old crush. All their friends are teasing them and everything, but still nothing.
Yeah, it's like a classic tale of teenage angst. But it really does get at this much bigger discussion
Mhm.
about communication and perception and maybe a little bit of wishful thinking.
Totally. And in the thread, she's asking if guys really don't get hints. And the comments are wild. Some of them are so hilarious. Like, there's this one guy who said he only realized the girl liked him like 3 years after she wrote their names with a heart around it.
Wow, that's a pretty clear sign. It makes you wonder, is it truly obliviousness or is there something else going on?
Right. And that's what's so fascinating about this whole thing. Some of the comments are saying that guys do actually miss hints, but it's because of social pressures. Like they're worried about reading friendliness as flirting, and then it becomes this awkward situation, or even worse, a potentially harmful situation.
Yeah.
So there's like a real fear of being labeled a creep.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You got to think about it. Men are often encouraged to be assertive, but at the same time, there's this awareness that you have to respect boundaries.
Yeah,
So they might not. They might hesitate to act unless it's like a super obvious sign.
totally. And speaking of super obvious signs, one comment mentioned this guy who was so confused when this girl got upset after he made a move, even though she had shown him her butt earlier in the evening. He was totally lost. So is that like a mixed signal? Or are guys just programmed to wait for a flashing neon sign?
Well, I mean, that specific anecdote aside, there's definitely a learning curve when it comes to reading signals. You know what one person considers a hint, someone else might not. It can all depend on individual experiences and cultural norms. And even like personal insecurities.
For sure. And past experiences are a big part of that too. Another commenter talked about how he used to try and act on hints, but he kept getting friend zoned
Yeah.
over and over. And so he became way more cautious. I mean, rejection hurts.
Yeah, it totally does. Your past experiences can really shape how you see things in the present. It's almost like your brain develops a defense mechanism to protect you from getting hurt again.
That makes a lot of sense. But then on the flip side, there were also these comments that were suggesting that maybe guys DO get the hints,
Mm-hmm.
but they're choosing not to act on them for other reasons. Like maybe they're afraid of rejection, or they don't want to ruin a friendship, or maybe they just don't feel the same way.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good reminder that there isn't just one answer. Some guys might be genuinely clueless, while others are overthinking everything. So it's really a whole spectrum of experiences and motivations.
Okay, so then how can you tell the difference between a guy who's totally oblivious and a guy who's holding back for some other reason?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Unfortunately, there's no, mind-reading trick to figure that out. But what you can do is look for patterns and try to understand the situation.
Right, so like what kind of patterns should we be looking for?
Well, one commenter in the thread made a really interesting point about confidence. He was saying that men are often raised with this message, that they need to prove their worth, especially when it comes to romance.
So even if a guy is getting the hints, his own insecurities could be what's holding him back.
Exactly. He might not even believe that someone could be genuinely interested in him. And that lack of confidence can lead to a lot of overthinking and second guessing, even when the signs are pretty obvious.
So it's like their own inner critic is drowning out any external validation they're getting.
Yeah, exactly. And this all ties back to the idea of social conditioning, too. Men are told to man up and be assertive, but then at the same time, they have to be careful about consent and respecting boundaries. It's like a minefield out there.
It really is. It sounds like they're being pulled in two completely opposite directions. So if you're someone who's dropping hints, how do you even begin to navigate this whole mess of social expectations and insecurities?
This is where clear communication is so important. I know it can be scary to be direct, especially when you're feeling all those butterflies, but in the long run, it can save you a lot of heartache.
So are you saying ditch the subtle hints and just go for it?
I wouldn't necessarily say go for it. Like, you don't need a grand romantic gesture or anything. But you can definitely shift from dropping hints to expressing your interest more directly.
Okay, I see.
Instead of hoping they'll pick up on your cues, try having a more direct conversation.
So like what would that sound like?
It could be as simple as saying, "Hey, I really enjoy spending time with you, and I was wondering if you'd be open to getting coffee sometime." It's not a declaration of love, but you are expressing that you want to connect with them on a deeper level.
That feels so much less intimidating than trying to orchestrate some kind of accidental touch or trying to decipher the meaning behind a long stare.
Right. Direct communication takes the pressure off of everyone. You're being upfront about your feelings, and you're giving them the space to respond honestly, without feeling pressured or put on the spot.
So it's about creating space for a real connection instead of playing this guessing game.
Exactly. And remember, even if they don't respond the way you were hoping, at least you have clarity. You can move on without wasting time and energy on what-ifs.
That's a good point. Rejection is never fun, but it's better than being stuck in limbo.
Totally. And this brings up another important part of this whole conversation, which is respecting boundaries and understanding that not everyone is going to feel the same way about you.
So then how do we know the difference between a guy who's clueless and a guy who's just not interested?
Again, it's not an exact science, but paying attention to their body language can give you some clues. Do they seem engaged when you're talking to them? Do they make an effort to spend time with you?
So if they're constantly looking at their phone or avoiding eye contact
Mm-hmm.
or giving you one-word answers, could that be a sign they're not interested?
It could be. But you always have to consider the context. Some people are just naturally shy, so their body language might not tell the whole story.
So it's about reading their body language, but also communicating directly.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between expressing your interest and respecting their space. And if you're ever unsure, just ask.
Yeah, asking seems to be the key takeaway here.
It really is. It's the best way to cut through all the confusion and get to the heart of the matter, whether you're trying to figure out if someone's interested or trying to understand why they might be hesitant. A conversation is usually the best approach.
So basically, we should throw out the "he's just not that into your" rule book and replace it with "just ask."
Pretty much, yeah. At the end of the day, healthy relationships are built on communication.
Communication is key.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, there's no foolproof way to, read minds. But you can look for patterns and consider the context of the situation.
Okay, I like that. Break it down for me. What kind of patterns should we be looking for?
Well, one commenter brought up a really interesting point about confidence. He was saying that men are often raised with this message, that they need to constantly prove their worth, especially, in romantic situations.
So even if a guy is picking up on the hints, his own insecurities could be holding him back.
Exactly. He might even doubt that someone could genuinely be interested in him. And then that lack of confidence leads to all this overthinking and second-guessing, even when the signs are super obvious.
Like their own inner critic is just drowning out any external validation they're getting.
Yeah, pretty much. And this also ties back to the idea of social conditioning. We tell men to man up and be assertive, but then at the same time, they're also trying to navigate this whole minefield of consent and respecting boundaries.
Right. It's like they're being pulled in two opposite directions.
Yeah.
So if you're the one dropping hints, how do you even begin to navigate all of that?
Well, this is where clear communication is so important. I know it can feel really scary to be direct, especially when you have all those butterflies in your stomach feelings, but trust me, it can save you so much heartache in the long run.
So you're saying forget the subtle hints and just go for it.
I wouldn't say go for it in a grand romantic gesture kind of way, but maybe shift from dropping hints to actually expressing your interest, instead of hoping they'll pick up on your subtle cues.
Yeah.
Try having a more direct conversation.
Okay, so what would that even sound like?
It could be something as simple as saying, hey, I really enjoy spending time with you, and I was wondering if you'd be open to grabbing coffee sometime. You're not confessing your undying love, but you are expressing that you want to connect with them on a deeper level.
Right. That does feel a lot less intimidating
Yeah.
than trying to orchestrate the perfect accidental touch.
Exactly. Direct communication really takes the pressure off of both people. You're being upfront about your feelings, and you're giving them the space to respond honestly, without feeling like they're being put on the spot.
So it's about creating a space for genuine connection, instead of playing this guessing game where no one really knows what's going on.
Precisely. And remember, even if their answer isn't what you were hoping for, at least you have clarity, and you can move on without all those what-ifs.
That's a good point. Rejection might sting, but it's definitely better than living in a world of uncertainty.
Absolutely. And this actually brings us to another important aspect of this conversation, which is respecting boundaries and understanding that not everyone is going to have those same feelings for you.
So then, how do we know the difference between a guy who's genuinely clueless and a guy who's just not interested?
Well, like we said before, it's not an exact science, But paying attention to their overall demeanor and body language can help. Like, do they seem engaged when you're talking to them? Do they initiate contact? Do they make an effort to spend time with you?
So if they're always on their phone when you're together,
Mm.
or avoiding eye contact,
Right.
or just giving you these short one-word answers, those could be signs that they're not feeling it.
Yeah, they could be. But again, you have to consider the context. Some people are just naturally shy or introverted,
Right.
so their body language might not be the most reliable indicator.
So we're looking at a combination of direct communication and paying attention to the vibes we're getting.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between expressing your interest while also respecting their space. And honestly, if you're ever unsure about something, the best thing you can do is just ask.
Asking seems to be the common thread through all of this.
It really is. It's the most effective way to cut through all the confusion and get to the heart of what's really going on. Whether you're trying to figure out if someone's interested or understand why they might be holding back, a conversation is almost always the best approach.
So we're throwing out the "he's just not that into you" rule book
Yeah,
and replacing it with "just ask."
basically.
Huh?
Yeah. Because ultimately, healthy relationships are built on communication.
Communication is key.
Absolutely.
You know, this whole conversation about guys and hints, it brings up another really important point that I think is worth talking about, which is the fear of being labeled a creep. It came up a lot in that Reddit thread we were talking about, and it really highlights the anxiety that a lot of guys are feeling these days. When it comes to dating,
It's definitely a valid concern, and I think it reflects this bigger cultural shift, where we're putting more emphasis on consent and respect, which is super important, of course. But like with a lot of things, there needs to be a balance. We want to encourage healthy boundaries, but we don't want to create this environment where guys are so afraid of making a wrong move that they just avoid pursuing connections altogether.
right, it's like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. They're told to be assertive and take initiative, but then they also have to navigate all these rules about what's appropriate and what might be seen as overstepping.
Exactly. One guy in the thread even said that he just ignores all hints now because he's so worried about misreading the situation and being labeled a creep, which is really sad because he's basically closing himself off to potential relationships because of this fear.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking. And it makes you wonder how much of this missing hints thing is actually rooted in fear. Fear of rejection, fear of misinterpreting signals, fear of being judged.
I think fear plays a huge role. It can be really paralyzing, especially when you combine it with those societal expectations we were talking about earlier. You know, those expectations that men should suppress their emotions and never appear vulnerable. It just makes it that much harder to navigate these already complex social dynamics.
So it's not just about whether guys are getting the hints. It's also about whether they feel safe enough to actually act on them.
Exactly. And that's where open and honest communication is so crucial. When both people feel comfortable expressing their feelings and what their intentions are, it can really help to reduce some of that fear and uncertainty.
So how do we encourage that kind of open communication, both on an individual level and in a broader societal sense?
Well, I think it starts with having more honest conversations about dating and consent and healthy relationships. We need to start challenging those old-fashioned gender stereotypes that tell men and women how they're supposed to behave when it comes to romance.
It's about creating a culture where being vulnerable is seen as a good thing, not a weakness. A culture where people feel comfortable expressing their true feelings without worrying about being judged.
Exactly. And while that might seem like a huge cultural shift, it really starts with small individual actions. It starts with being willing to have those tough conversations and to challenge those outdated norms and to create safe spaces for open communication.
So basically, the answer to the question, do guys really not get hints, is a lot more complicated than just a yes or no.
Yeah, it really is. It's about understanding that there's so many factors at play: social conditioning, personal experiences, communication styles. And it's about recognizing that open and honest communication is the best way to navigate the often confusing world of romantic attraction.
This whole conversation has been so insightful, and it's really highlighted the importance of clear communication, not just in romantic relationships, but in every aspect of our lives. It's about understanding that we all see things differently, and that making assumptions can lead to all sorts of misunderstandings.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, that about wraps things up for today's deep dive. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you found this conversation as thought-provoking as we did. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to Voices of the Soul and check out our other deep dives wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Shauna Pelage. Until next time, Stay curious and keep those conversations flowing.